started recording. Then we can start reading now. Okay? So, who will read? Last time Pallavi read. Kiran, Archana, if you are in a position to read, you can read.
Yes, I can read, Rangada. Right now I can read.
Go ahead.
Page 269, often we see this desire, right?
Yes, that's right.
I have noted that, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
Often we see this desire of personal salvation overcome by another attraction which also belongs to the higher turn of our nature and which indicates the essential character of the action the liberated soul must pursue. It is that which is implied in the great legend of the Amitabha Buddha, who turned away when his spirit was on the threshold of nirvana and took the vow never to cross it while a single being remained in the sorrow and the ignorance. It is that which underlines the sublime verse of the Bhagavad Purana. I desire not the supreme state with all its 8 siddhis, nor the cessation of rebirth. May I assume the sorrow of all creatures who suffer and enter into them, so that they may be made free from grief. It is that which inspires a remarkable passage in a letter of Swami Vivekananda. I have lost all wish for my salvation, wrote the great Vedanti. May I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries, so that I may worship the only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls, and above all, my God the wicked, my God the miserable, my God the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship. He who is the high and low, the saint and the sinner, the good and the worm, him worship, the visible, the knowable, the real, the omnipresent. Break all other idols, in whom there is neither past life nor future birth, nor death, nor going, nor coming, in whom we always have been and always will be one. Him worship, break all other idols.
Yeah. What a high aspiration and how unselfish one can be. This is what we don't even want our own salvation. We want salvation for everybody else. We want suffering to disappear in the world. And that's exactly what Sri Aurobindo also is. He has not added his own name. Obviously he can't. But he is the one who is working for mankind and evolution and not for himself. He said that very clearly in a letter also to somebody. That the supermind is not for me. It's for the earth consciousness and the humanity, for man. So, very clear what he is saying. So, I don't know if we need to go through it. It is so clear, huh? So, he is giving 3 examples. Buddha, and this is a legend. It's a legend only because he attained nirvana, but they are saying that he took an oath never to go into nirvana unless everybody on earth is free from ignorance. Now, how is that possible? Because everybody on earth, thousands will be born later on, but he can't go on make it for eternity. So it's a legend. Okay? This is a great legend. Okay? It shows his attitude, Buddha's attitude. And then he goes on to that Bhagavata Purana. I desire not the supreme state of all the 8 siddhis, the Ashtasiddhis, nor the cessation of rebirth. May I assume the sorrow of all creatures who suffer and enter into them, so that they may be made free from grief. Finally, Vivekananda's letter. It was a letter to a foreign lady, and he says that I am not interested in my own salvation. I am interested in salvation for mankind. Let suffering disappear from the world. He only said it, but Sri Aurobindo goes about doing something about it. And how is that? By bringing down the supermind and taking the evolution to the next step. So a large chunk of humanity will be free from suffering. There is suffering will continue in the world, but it will be made easier because the supramental race will not be subject to suffering and ignorance. Okay? So, beautiful quote. And she has taken the trouble to quote the whole letter, the entire letter. So I'll do one thing. Since it is so clear, I'll just read the summary and we'll go on to the next para. I'm reading the summary, they are my words. Okay? But the gist I'm trying to explain in a summary. Normal men in spiritual life seek individual liberation of soul and are quite satisfied with its fulfillment. But in some cases, a farther, higher, nobler turn of human nature asserts itself, and a strong impulse to see all mankind free from ignorance and suffering seizes them. It is the spiritual nobler tendency which is imaged in the legend of the Amitabha Buddha, when he pledged his intention to never enter nirvana until every human being would rise to the self which is imaged in the would rise to the self beyond all ignorance and suffering. It is the same aspiration expressed in the Bhagavad Purana, which goes like this. I desire not the supreme state with all its 8 siddhis, nor the cessation of rebirth. This is the normal idea. Spiritual life is meant for the cessation of rebirth. No more birth. So you will be free from suffering. May I assume the sorrow of all creatures to suffer and enter into them, so that they will be made free from grief. And the third quote from Vivekananda. Again, the spiritual streak is seen in Vivekananda when he wrote to a Western disciple, I have lost all wish for my salvation. May I be born again and again and suffer thousands of miseries so that I may worship the only God that exists. It's a way of saying, but what a powerful way of saying. Okay? The only God that exists, the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls. He wants liberation for mankind. Exactly like in Savitri. Savitri is offered. Death becomes God. And God offers her, come into my eternal peace. Don't worry about the others. She denies and says, no. If you want to give me peace, I want that peace for everybody on earth. Like that, 3 times she is warned to come away. But she refuses. So it's the same spirit which denies selfish aims in spiritual life, but wants spiritual perfection for everyone. Okay. So that's a quote from Vivekananda. Powerful quote. That's what the para says, that the highest, noblest wish that a human being can have is to work for others and not for oneself. So, we can read the next one, the last sentence. Yeah.
Rangada, one question. You said coming down of supramental will lessen the normal humanity's sorrows and all. How is it possible?
No. What will happen is, now when we look up to a yogi, we respect them. Okay? We respect them. And many human beings, they also want to be like them. But when you, normal man, sees a supramental being, there is no suffering in that supramental being. There is no death. There are no laws of physical laws, no levitation. No gravitational pull downwards. Absolutely no limit to the body. You can go from anywhere, one place to another. Miraculous conditions. Naturally, the others will want to go also to that state. They will want to duplicate the same thing. So in that sense, humanity will be helped. Will be helped to go quicker. But also, a yogi will want to become a Superman when he sees a Superman. A normal man will want to at least become a yogi. And a very normal man will want to become a yogi. Even animals will be influenced to go to the human level. Chandra said that very clearly, the supramental effect will go right down to the material world. In other words, everybody will be helped one notch to go above. In that sense, suffering is not going to disappear for everybody. But the desire to get out of suffering will become more common. In that sense, I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah? So, yeah, there are many people who feel that, who misunderstand and say that when the Superman comes, everything will become divine. Even a stone will become divine. Certainly not. That's not what will happen. It's interesting to see that whenever there is a upward evolution, the number of people who go up to the upward evolution is much less than the general population. Okay? See, when matter becomes life, does all matter become life? No. Stones continue to be there, okay? Then mud continues to be there, mountains continue to be there, matter remains. But the life, beings with life, animal life, is less than the number of atoms in matter. Then when man comes in from the animal world, there will always be more animals than men. Then when you take the generality of men, you will see that there are less yogis than men. It's a pyramidal structure. And naturally, when the supramental race comes, there will be much less than even the yogis, those who have attained the self. So, it's a pyramidal structure. Nothing will change at the bottom. But there will be one step easier to go to the next step. That is what it means. It's a, evolution does not mean that everything will change. Evolution means that the higher possibilities of matter will be revealed slowly, in a smaller and smaller sampling. The samples will be always less than the one below it. Okay? That's the thing.
Okay, Ramana.
Yeah. So, let's go to the next paragraph. The last two sentences. Who will read? Shilpa, you have come after a long time. Welcome back. Last time you were there.
Thank you, Rangada.
You are in Pondicherry now, na?
Yes, Rangada.
Okay. So, would you like to read?
I don't have book at present with me.
Okay.
I'm out little. Huh?
Then Kiran can read.
Yes, Rangada.
Go ahead. The last two sentences.
The last two sentences contain indeed the whole gist of the matter. The true salvation or the true freedom from the chain of rebirth is not the rejection of terrestrial life or the individual's escape by a spiritual self-annihilation. Even as a true renunciation is not the mere physical abandonment of life and society, it is the inner identification with the divine, in whom there is no limitation of past lives and future birth, but instead the eternal existence of the unborn soul. He who is free inwardly, even doing actions, does nothing at all, says the Gita. For It is the nature that works in him under the control of the Lord of nature. Equally, even if he assumes 100 times the body, he is free from any chain of birth or mechanical wheel of existence, since he lives in the unborn and undying spirit, not in the life of the body. Therefore, attachment to the escape from rebirth is one of the ideals which whoever keeps, the sadhak of the integral yoga, must break and cast away from him. For his yoga is not limited to the realization of the transcendent beyond all world by the individual soul. It embraces all the realization of the universal, the sum total of all souls, and cannot therefore be confined to the movement of a personal salvation and escape. Even in his transcendence of cosmic limitations, he is still one with all in God. A divine work remains for him in the universe.
There you are. So this is the normal idea in human beings. Once you go to the self, yes, the aim of spiritual life is reached, and you don't need to do any more work. But Swayambhav has a different take, and also the Gita, that you can continue to work. In the beginning, a normal man, when he is trying to go to the self, he does all his work, karma yoga, he does his work as an offering to the divine. But the purpose is for his own elevation into the Brahman consciousness, or the self, or Atman, whatever you want to say. Word is the same. It's a consciousness which is absolutely featureless, static, and where there is no suffering, no pain, nothing. You are completely detached from the physical world. Even your body, mind, life is not your own. So, but once you have reached the self, the normal idea in India was that you have reached the goal of life. And what is that? Liberation. No more birth. You are completely free from the possibility of suffering in a physical world. But the Gita and Swayambhav also say that now works can continue. But when they continue, the purpose is different now. Earlier in the ignorance, the purpose was to go to self, for yourself. But now, you continue to do the work, but for the Lord. And that Lord will tell you what to do and what not to do. And that will include work for the next stage of evolution. That's what he says. Okay? There is some work to be done. I'll do one thing. I'll read out the summary. Then we get the trend of the paragraph, and then if necessary we'll read the paragraph also. Okay? In the integral yoga, it is not the aim to enjoy eternal heavenly pleasures, nor to escape once and for all from the necessity of rebirth into a world of pain and ignorance. The real attitude for the liberation of the soul should be what Buddha and Vivekananda adopted and resorted to, which is the liberation of all mankind from ignorance and pain, not only an individual mukti. Renunciation too is not merely abandonment of family ties. True sannyasa is not physical, though it may be resorted to if needed. Physical sannyasa you can do. You can give up your home, you can give up your even clothes. Okay? The Jains do that, and Ramana Maharshi also did that. At one time, it was almost like that for Swayambhav also. They had to call Motilal Roy in Chandanagar to send clothes. Such was the relaxation that even Swayambhav was in a position. He had no sandals also. Okay? So, relaxation was imposed on Swayambhav. But in his case, the renunciation is inward, not necessarily outward. Because even if you do outward renunciation, which is not bad by itself, that's very good. But you may have no renunciation inward. Physically you may give, but you may regret. Okay? So physical renunciation is okay, but it is the inner renunciation The disappearance of desire and attachment and ego, that is the most important thing. Okay? So, renunciation too is not merely abandonment of family ties. True sannyasa is not necessarily physical only, though it may be resorted to if needed, but a union with the divine, where one attains the status of the divine soul, unborn and eternal. Okay? You become a divine soul. The liberated consciousness is in an immutable condition which engages in no action, even while acting in the world with the body-mind life. Now, this needs a little explanation. When you are in the normal ignorance, actually you are not acting. It is nature which is forcing your body, your life and your mind to act. But because you have an ego, you think that you are acting. This illusion disappears when you go into the self. When you go into the self, the Brahman consciousness, this illusion disappears. Why? Because the ego disappears. And when the ego disappears, you see clearly that you are not doing the action. It is nature which is doing the action using your body, your mind and your life. So, that's a great liberation. The understanding that you are not the doer of action. Okay? The liberated consciousness is an immutable condition which engages in no action, even while acting in the world. That's why the paragraph says that even while doing actions, if you are in the self, you are not doing any action. Action is being done through you. Okay? In the beginning, it is nature which does that, but when you go to the self, then the divine can act through your body-mind life. You are not acting anymore. No more action for you from the self upwards. Self downwards, yes, you have the impression that you are doing, and that impression also is useful. Although it's an illusion, so I must say that it's useful. It is useful to push you towards the non-action. Okay? The sadhaka of the integral yoga must reach the transcendent, but must not shun worldly existence. He embraces the cosmos and identifies himself with the sum total of all souls. What is the sum total of all souls? The cosmic consciousness. You feel that you are everybody else also. Therefore, true liberation is to station the soul in the transcendent while acting in the world with body, life, mind, but without identifying itself with the body, mind, life. You have to continue to act. If you are a follower of the integral yoga, you have to continue to act even after you have reached the self. But now you are doing it for the Lord and not for yourself. Okay? So, 24. We've still got about 15 minutes. So we can read the next paragraph. That work. What is the work you have to do? That is, you have to live. You have to live that. Okay? Who will read next? Kiran has read, and Seema, if you want to read, you can read. Otherwise, Pallavi will read. Or just
okay, Dada.
Okay, go ahead, read. That work.
That work cannot be fixed by any mind-made rule or human standard, for his consciousness has moved away from human law and limits and passed into the divine liberty, away from government by the external and transient into the self-rule of the inner and eternal, away from the binding forms of the finite into the free self-determination of the infinite. Howsoever he lives and acts, says the Gita, he lives and acts in me. The rules which the intellect of man lays down cannot apply to the liberated soul. by the external criteria and tests which their mental associations and prejudgments prescribe. Such a one cannot be judged. He is outside the narrow jurisdiction of these fallible tribunals. It is immaterial whether he wears the garb of the ascetic or lives the full life of the householder, whether he spends his days in what men call holy works or in the many-sided activities of the world, whether he devotes himself to the direct leading of men to the life like Buddha, Christ or Shankara, or governs kingdoms like Janaka, or stands before men like Sri Krishna as a politician or a leader of armies. What he eats or drinks, what are his hobbies or his pursuits, whether he fails or succeeds, whether his work be one of the construction or of destruction, whether he supports or restores an old order or labors to replace it by a new, whether his associates are those whom men delight to honor or those whom their sense of superior righteousness outcasts and reprobates, whether his life and deeds are approved by his contemporaries or he is condemned as a misleader of men and a fomenter of religious, moral or social heresies. He is not governed by the judgments of men or the laws laid down by the ignorant. He obeys an inner voice and is moved by an unseen power. His real life is within, and this is its description, that he lives, moves and acts in God, in the divine, in the infinite.
That last line, I will read it in this way because it's very important. That one two-letter word is very important. His real life is within, and is its description that he lives, moves and acts in God. Okay? In God. Your whole being is in God, in the divine, in the infinite. Okay? And because sometimes you can be with the divine. You can live with the divine. Or you can live by the divine. But to live in the divine is the Gita's absolute. Okay? So, this is the beautiful para, wonderful, and we'll see what is. So, if you have reached the self, there is no work to be done. Is a normal idea. But Shri says, no, there is a work to be done, but that work you will not decide. It will be decided by the Lord. Okay? That work cannot be fixed by any mind-made rule or human standard. For his consciousness has moved away from human law and limits and passed into the divine liberty. He is completely free, away from government by the external and transient, into the self-rule of the inner and eternal, for whom there are no rules made by society will not apply to him. Only his self-rule. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam raja. The divine decides what rules you will follow or not. In fact, there are no rules at all for it. Of the inner and eternal, away from the binding forms of the finite, into the free self-determination of the infinite. Howsoever he lives and acts, says the Gita, he lives and acts in me. Atho mai. Srila is very fond of this quote, and he goes on repeating this quite often. Okay, so just 1 second. Okay, not the head. The rules which the intellect of man lays down cannot apply to the liberated soul. Okay. So, one example is very clear. Normally, when a person has to abandon his family because of a higher call, it may be the call of the nation, because your nation is at war and you have to give up. So then, who will worry about the family? So that Srila says that the higher call is always legitimate. If a man has to look after his family, but there is a higher call, okay, not a selfish call. He may go away for other reasons, but when there is a higher call like that of the nation or God, it is legitimate. And the highest call, the divine, at that time you don't have to worry about the family. There is a criticism very often given that you are abandoning your family, but the call is from a higher level. So that takes vigilance. Okay. This is what Srimad has explained in the Yeshivana Gita. The rules which the intellect of man lays down cannot apply to the liberated soul. By the external criteria and tests which their mental associations and prejudgments prescribe, such a one cannot be judged. There is a very interesting story. There is a gentleman here in the ashram called Madan Lal. Okay? And he used to play tennis also with us. So he abandoned his family and came to the ashram because he had the spiritual call. Then, very shortly after he came, his family came here and pleaded. He said, come back. You have to look after your family. And then when he said, no, I won't, they wrote to Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo said, when a man is called for a spiritual life, it is perfectly within his right to do that, and he need not go back to the family. So, this gentleman was there, his name was Madan Lal, and he used to be in the ashram and he used to even play tennis with us. So that is one case where the higher call. So what Srimad is saying, no rules made by society apply to the spiritual man. Okay? Such a one cannot be judged. And now Srimad explained, a spiritual man outwardly be doing anything normal. He may be a family man, he may be a soldier, he may be even a cart puller. Okay? He can do anything, or he can be a family man. He can be doing everything in the most ordinary way. Remember Kabir, he was a weaver. Okay? So, you judge and say, oh, he was a weaver. No. Okay? Shri Krishna was a cowherd to begin with. Okay, so this is what he's saying, that man-made rules do not apply to the, and he's describing, it's very beautiful description. Such a one cannot be judged. He is outside the narrow jurisdiction of these fallible tribunals. Fallible, which make mistakes, erroneous, okay? Tribunals. Social tribunals. Tribunals is court. It is immaterial whether he wears the garb of the ascetic or lives the full life of the householder. The garb of the ascetic, very clear. Raman Maharshi is a very good example, and all the ascetics who go away, very good example. Lives the full life of the householder. There are many interesting cases, but normally the case of Janaka is given. Janaka was a king, living like a king, wearing silk clothes, enjoying good food. Okay? But he is a karma yogi. No attachment to anything. Okay? Then there is also a very interesting, there is a gentleman called Lahiri Mahasaya. Okay? He created he is not so well known, but to the yogic circles he is very well known. He invented Kriya Yoga. Okay? So there are followers, Lahiri Mahasaya. And even in Sriranda's, Ramakrishna's life, there were some who were householders. Okay? There is also a very interesting case of a Muslim man who went to the Himalayas and took a Hindu guru. And after spending some time with the guru, he decided that he wanted to become an ascetic. Okay? And he told the guru that I want to become an ascetic and I want to go back to, I've had my training with you and I want to go back. The guru told him that your life is not that of an ascetic. You have to go and become a householder. So that man came back. This is a real story, huh? I've seen videos of it. And he, Muslim man, he became a Hindu and he married, had children, but yet he was living a spiritual life. Okay. So this is what Srila is explaining here. Whether he spends his day in what men call holy works, or in the many sided activities of the world, like Sri many sided activities of the world, whether he devotes himself to the direct leading of men like with a light like Buddha, Christ, Shankara, or aim or governs kingdoms like Janaka, or stands before men like Sri Krishna as a politician and a leader of armies. What are his habits? What he eats or drinks? What are his habits or his pursuits? Whether he fails or succeeds, that also does not matter. Whether his work be one of construction or of destruction. Sometimes you have to destroy. In the case of, in the story of Christ, there is one place where he goes over destroying everything in the temple. Okay. Because it was not being done in the right spirit. Okay. So, whether he supports or restores an old order or labors to replace it by a new. Okay. Whether his associates are those whom men delight to honor or those whom their sense of superior righteousness outcasts and reprobates. The word reprobate means an immoral person. So you can associate so-called with an immoral person when you see the possibilities in him. There is a very interesting story about a fellow who came. He was pretending to be an army officer, but actually he was a hypocrite. He was a bondo. But mother was giving him a lot of attention. And later on it turned out that he was a hypocrite. He was not a man from the army or from the air force. And when people asked mother about it, mother said, even tomorrow if he comes, I am seeing his soul. I am not seeing his outer nature. Okay. So the spiritual life cares a jot for morality. Okay. Whether his life or deeds are approved by his contemporaries or is condemned as a misleader of men and a fomenter of religious, moral or social heresies. So, misleader of men, perfect example, Socrates. Okay. Socrates was condemned to death because he was a misleader of men. Because he was breaking the social standards and norms, and that would disturb society. So he was given the hemlock poison and he drank it very happily. So that is the one who is condemned as a misleader of men and a fomenter of religious, moral or social heresies. This you could say is the one who started the Protestant religion, Martin Luther. Okay? He was a fomenter of religious, moral and social heresy. He is not governed by the judgments of men or the laws laid down by the ignorant. He obeys an inner voice and is moved by an unseen power. His real life is within, and this is his description, that he lives, moves and acts in God, in the divine, in the infinite. So, it's exactly 8:40. Next time, we'll go to the next para, but if his action is governed by no external rule. Okay? So, very interesting two paras we read today, where in spiritual life, no social laws can apply to them. However noble the social law may be, but it does not apply to them. Men who lead spiritual life. Okay.
Rangada, can I tell that because the social laws are made by men, that is why in spiritual life it is not applicable.
Quite right. See, take the Jains. Okay? They don't care what society says. They Digambar Jains. They are breaking all social laws. Yeah. I remember once I was going to Madras with my driver, okay? He was a Tamil driver. And this Muni, Jain Muni, Digambar Muni, was coming to Pondicherry, okay? And I was going to Madras and he was coming to Pondicherry. But he was absolutely naked and there were even many women also following him. My driver was absolutely devastated and flabbergasted. He was furious. And for the next 1 hour he went on saying, what is this nonsense? What is this nonsense? And finally, next day when I came back, I was told that at 5 o'clock in the morning, he went into the ashram. Okay? Like that, in that condition. He was a real student. So, the spiritual man obeys need not obey. Not that he does not obey. He need not obey any social laws. Au revoir, everybody. Have a nice day.
Au revoir, Rangada. Bonne
Au
journée.
revoir tout le monde.
Thank you, Rangada.
Okay, au revoir.
Thank you, Dada. Au revoir.
Au revoir. See you on Thursday. Okay. I'm closing.